Today, we're going to talk about an issue that is very much in our minds as media from diverse communities from around the country. We usually have most of the immigration debate focused on the border, deportation numbers, rates, and politics in Washington. But today, we want to look somewhere else at America's small towns and rural communities. Immigration has helped many of these communities fill jobs, counter population decline, sustain schools and businesses, and become increasingly diverse. Now, as the Trump administration intensifies immigration enforcement and restricts some forms of legal protection, we want to ask what happens to these communities when immigration slows and deportations increase. We have 5 panelists who approach the question from different perspectives and expertise. And rather than asking them to give formal presentations, we're going to have a conversation. Let me present them and then go right into the conversation. Tim Slack is a professor of sociology at Louisiana State University and an expert on demographic and economic change in rural and small town America. Jenny Murray is president and CEO of the National Immigration Forum and will help us understand the federal policy landscape and its economic implications. Rachel Parrish is executive director of Welcoming America, an organization that has a very interesting work directly with communities around across the country, navigating immigration and demographic change. It's fascinating stuff. Mark Prosser is the former chief of police of Storm Lake, Iowa, and now works with the Diocese of Sioux City, Iowa, giving him a unique perspective on immigration, public safety, and community life in Northwest Iowa. And last but not least, the Reverend Carl Ruby, who's a senior pastor of Central Christian Church in Springfield, Ohio, where he has worked closely with the city's Haitian community. We will begin with a short conversation with each of them, then bring everyone together for a sort of roundtable discussion, and then we'll reserve the final 18 to 20 minutes for questions from reporters. So reporters, your questions are going to go more towards the third phase of the briefing. Let's start with Jenny. Jenny, I know you're going to help us grasp a little bit of the broad impact. We have about 5 minutes for this exchange. We talked about you explaining a little bit of the economic impact of the deportations rates and a shrinking economic workplace, particularly in places that are not the major cities that we usually hear about, but other parts of the country that depend so heavily on immigrant labor. Please go ahead, and you have, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Pilar, and to ACOM and Sandy and everyone else. It's good to be with you. So the national landscape is really important for us to situate the impact in the local community so that we can understand what's happening, macroeconomic lens, but also demography overall in the country. Immigration is at net negative right now. And so that's something really important to understand. 2025 was the first year in our nation's history where we've had a net negative immigration number. And we are on track in 2026 to do the same. And let me talk about some of those types of numbers and why it matters. So 13% of the country is immigrant, 19% of the workforce still today. A very heavy concentration of participation in the workforce is foreign-born. That's across all skill levels. So often immigration and immigrant workers gets conflated to just a high skill or just an entry level or a farm worker role. And that's untrue. We have key roles being plugged all across our entire workforce by all kinds of talent at every level, all skilled talent, if you ask me, across all of the sectors and all of the levels. And so that's really important to know. A couple of big things have impacted this net negative migration. Enforcement, which I know has been the conversation so much, has had a huge impact. In 2025, we saw 2.5 million, around 2.2, 2.3 million folks self-deport, either to hope to be to deport as a family, not to be separated as a family, and or believing some of the promises DHS made that if folks left, they would be able to then come back to this country. And then another 675,000 folks in 2025 were forcefully left this country. So they were detained and deported. That's a 3 million person impact. Then if we think about the workforce numbers, 1.1 million folks have TPS as of the first week of September. We will have seen that last category of temporary protective status individuals now ending that status. So they will have moved from authorized workers to unauthorized workers. That's an additional, as we add that with the parolees who have also lost their work status, we're now looking at several millions of folks who have also lost their work status. So when you add all these things together, as well as the contributions of immigrants, it's a really stark economic lens. So immigrants every year add $1.7 trillion to the state, local, and federal tax bracket or proceeds. And that's 1.3 trillion in taxes, but they generate another 1.7 million into the economy as consumers. So all of that together, American businesses having less workers, less people here contributing to the economy, less people paying in taxes and securing things like Social Security, we're looking at a pretty dire impact overall. And so I'm really thrilled today to hear from my friends and peers across this panel about how that it really looks at the local level, but as just sharing the kind of macro lens, we're extremely concerned at the National Immigration Forum about what this is doing. The last thing I would leave you with is with this all-time low birth rate and with our own Office of Management and Budget projecting that between 2024 and 2034, we should have been on track for an $8.9 trillion GDP increase due to immigrants. We can no longer count on that number. So Pilar, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I'll bring you back before you leave. I know you have to leave us at the half hour because you have something else to do. But thank you for that summary of those numbers. Let's go to Professor Slack. And I wanted to ask you, Professor, to tell us a little bit more about the role immigration has played in sustaining rural and small town communities, both demographically and economically. Can you paint us a picture of what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on this afternoon and being able to interact with these folks. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I mean, when you think about the role immigration has played for rural and small town communities, it sort of depends on how far back historically you want to go, right? I mean, everyone in the United States is descended from people who migrated here from somewhere else. It's just a matter of how many generations back you want to look. But if we focus just on the last decade or so, the short answer is immigration's provided a population lifeline to many rural communities, offsetting the population loss that would have occurred in their absence. Depopulation is a major demographic trend in rural America, and population aging and youth outmigration are the contributing factors. From 2010 to 2020, the total population in rural U.S. counties decreased by about 0.5 percentage point. And this was unprecedented. Never before in history had rural America experienced an overall decadal population loss. But this wasn't a monolithic experience across the country either. About 2/3 of rural counties lost population and about 1/3 gained population over the decade. Aging and outmigration are especially pronounced among rural non-Hispanic white people. And that's a demographic group that's declined in both absolute numbers and percentage terms over the last decade. Immigrants serve to offset those losses, and in many cases have. Of those rural counties that managed growth from 2010 to 2020, roughly 200 only did so because of non-white and immigrant population increases that managed to offset non-Hispanic white population loss. In fact, between 2020 and 2024, nearly all the positive net migration in rural counties that are not adjacent to a metro, um, nearly all the positive net migration in those areas was international in nature. So I don't know if would you like me to go on, or I mean,
Yeah, one thing that caught my attention about your work is that you emphasize, or you found that rural America has become increasingly racially and ethnically diverse. People have this idea of rural America being white, and then some immigrants come in, but it's truly changing the nature of the popular image of rural America, isn't it?
oh, absolutely. I mean, for starters, the idea that rural America is mostly white has never been true in the American South or the West, but it's changing everywhere.
Yeah.
The the people often picture rural America as mostly white, but today about 1 in 4 rural residents are non-white. Hispanic and Black people make up the largest shares, and of course, Indigenous people have the greatest share of their population living in rural areas of any major racial or ethnic group.
Yeah.
The youth population in rural America is even more diverse. I mean, what I would recommend to the folks on this call is, if you ever want to see where demography is going, visit a elementary or middle school, right?
Yeah.
So the youth population in rural America is even more diverse. Currently, about 1 in 3 children in rural America is non-white. So the future of rural America is increasingly diverse, even if popular images don't always show it.
Yeah. Okay, Professor, we're going to move on, but please stay around for the conversation in the next part. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to bring in Rachel Parrish, Executive Director, Welcoming America. Rachel, tell us a little bit about what are local leaders and communities across the country experiencing as federal immigration policies change.
Yeah, thank you. It's really wonderful to be part of this panel, including of some, really inspiring leaders, and amongst a group of people who I would also include as some of the local leaders who are really doing critical work right now to build trust with communities. So I know these are not just theoretical conversations for many of you on the call today. And so thank you truly for the work that you do, especially in this moment in time. I have the great privilege to be able to work with many communities around the U.S. And I think what they're experiencing is a real range based on the levels of ICE activity in their backyards, based on their political context and many other things. But consistently and across the board, many places, including rural places, are seeing the results of a real breakdown in trust and relationships and fracturing in communities as a result of many of the federal policies aimed at both expelling people from the country, but also sowing a lot of fear and division. And I think at the same time, and driven by many of the real imperatives that Jenny laid out and that Tim laid out around the demographics of the U.S., many places who have been on a trajectory and want to continue to be on a trajectory, not to expel people, but to attract and keep people in communities and reinforce a sense of trust, belonging, participation, and connection between neighbors. And so there are many places around the US that are really doubling down on those things, some in quiet ways, some in more visible ways. So places like Emporia, Kansas, which we certified as a welcoming place last year, which means that the community really rallied to put together a proactive effort over years to make sure that when people arrived, they were seen as valued contributors to the community, and that there are deliberate efforts to really incorporate people in community life, not just for the benefit of immigrant communities, but also for the benefit of the whole community, because we know that when communities have trust, relationships with one another, when people are able to go to their police or their public institutions, where their voice is heard and public policy is responsive to that, that makes for a stronger community. And so the trajectory of people who remain really committed to building welcoming places continues. I think it will continue to get stronger because these imperatives are real and are existential for many places, and particularly for rural places. Happy to get into more of what some specific communities are doing. But
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
The many rural communities in some parts of the country had a conservative view about immigration and were concerned about immigration, and many of them voted for the current policy. Are there some of these communities that are now concerned about what's happening?
Yes, I mean, I think many of us are reading, the same stories of places where, suddenly a neighbor has been deported and there's a recognition of the consequences of these policies in a way that, people weren't proximate to before they hit their community. But I think also many places, even across a variety of different politics, are also, in addition to some of the moral aspects of, what it means for community members to be ripped away from family members. And I know Carl Ruby will be talking more about what is happening now in Springfield. I think at the local level, people are very practical. What we're talking about are our neighbors, people that we go to work with, that we go to, that we worship with. And I think, even beyond the consequences of, what is happening right now, for a long time, there's been a recognition that we can't make our communities whole and we can't make our communities function if we don't have efforts to create an environment where people want to come and want to put down roots. So yes, the politics are really complicated right now, but also there are many people across the political spectrum who understand why it's incredibly important to go in the opposite direction and reinforce, welcoming from a position of values, but also from a place of it's just the right thing to do for the community, for economic reasons, and for a cohesive community.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to move now to Mark Prosser, former chief of police of Storm Lake, Iowa, and now with the Diocese of Sioux City. Mark, you've watched this transformation firsthand in Iowa. What has immigration meant for the communities that you come from, economically, demographically, and socially? Give me a couple of minutes of that, and then I have another question.
Absolutely, and thank you for the invitation. I can actually answer this very quickly by just saying ditto to Professor Slack and the numbers and how he shared the impact on rural America. But I went to work, I came out of the St. Louis area and went to work as the police chief in Storm Lake, Iowa, a small rural community in northwest Iowa, and for 30 years watched the positive and impressive impact of immigration come to that community and provide a labor base and change it from a primarily all-white community that was shrinking in population to a very diverse community that was growing in population, growing its industry, growing its stores, having housing needs, and so on. So the growth and the vitality and the energy that has been brought to rural communities in Iowa, especially Northwest Iowa, has been 100% immigrant growth and immigrant impact in those communities, to where now that community in their public school system, pre-K through 12, is about 91% of the students, English is not their primary language. It's just gone through a rapid, in the scheme of things, 30, 35 years, impressive transition, and brought great stability to that community. Again, folks coming there for jobs. There's large packing plants there, and they need the labor, and so on. But if you back away and go to 10,000 feet over rural America, what you're seeing is shrinkage of rural America and these communities, folks moving to a more urban area or to the south and southwest. And you can best see that in a snapshot by looking at their public school systems. At least in Iowa, where an individual community would have their school system named after them. Now they are a bunch of initials because they've had to consolidate 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 systems because of the lack of students and the lack of population. Where we have had immigrants move in and grow communities, those schools are growing, they're building new schools, and you don't see the consolidation needs.
So let's see the other side of the coin now that we have this massive immigration crackdown happening. I don't know if it's happened in Iowa or not. We haven't heard much about Iowa, but can you tell us, has it happened in Iowa, and how are immigrant communities reacting? How are they faring there in your area?
Well, I think it happens in large, very public waves, and then it happens out of smaller ICE offices, one person here, five people there, and so on. It still has the same impact, especially on smaller communities. We're only a few hours south of Minneapolis. The state of Iowa felt the impact of what occurred in the Twin Cities. And even before that, there are waves of fear going through our immigrant communities based on what they see in the news, what's happened somewhere else in the country, what statements are being made in Washington, D.C., or what may have happened down the street when someone was picked up and incarcerated that has no criminal history, but may have just had document issues. And it's causing people not to go to work. It's causing people not to go to their doctor's appointment, not to appear at court, not to go to church, and not to go grocery shopping. And those advocates who work with those groups are dealing with that day in and day out, whether it's rural or whether it's urban.
Okay, now I want to take us to a community that has become perhaps one of the most visible examples of this entire national debate, Springfield, Ohio. And let me bring in Reverend Dr. Carl Ruby, Senior Pastor of the Central Christian Church at Springfield, Ohio, has a large community of people from Haiti, who I think it's 15,000 approximately, who many of them have TPS status. And you just mentioned before that ICE is on the streets of Springfield today. Reverend, please share with us what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, as I listen to Rachel and Tim speak in particular, all of that's true in Springfield. And my emotions are raw today because it's affecting my church. People from my church are being fitted with ankle monitors, picked up by ICE. And Springfield was a Midwest Rust Belt city, and we only had 54,000 people. So when you hear about 10 to 20,000 Haitians coming, that's a big number for us. And we went from being one of the fastest shrinking cities. We hadn't grown in 50 years, and we had shrunk all the way back to what our population was in 1920 before the Haitians arrived. And they brought with them an economic resurgence. They've started businesses, churches, nonprofits. They have helped existing businesses expand. And Governor DeWine has said that this is a humanitarian and economic disaster for Springfield, and it truly is. We went from having lots of hardworking immigrants to all of a sudden having 10 to 15,000 people who've had their jobs taken away from them and who don't receive unemployment benefits. So it's a crisis in terms of just putting food on the table and paying the rent. And there is a level of panic in town right now. What's been happening is they've been getting letters telling them they have to report to ICE, and then they've been fitted with ankle monitors and told that they have to come back when they're requested or they'll be picked up. So it's a dehumanizing thing. It's a scary thing. And the last 2 days, ICE has actually been in town picking up people. So Springfield is currently in a crisis, and it's totally unnecessary. They are hardworking people. I talked with one employer. I was actually I was sitting down talking to our governor, and an owner of a business walked by, and Governor DeWine asked, what's going to be like trying to replace these Haitian workers? And And he said it will take several Americans to replace each worker because they always show up for work. They always pass drug tests. They take as much overtime as they can get, and they just work really hard. And that's for lots of reasons. One reason is many of them are still supporting families, and in some cases, orphans who become a part of their family back in Haiti. So this is a tragedy in Springfield, but it's being duplicated in homes in Haiti that were depending upon the income that these folks were earning. I pastor a relatively small church that has believed that how we welcome immigrants is a part of the gospel. And we've grown. We were about 125 a year ago, and we're about 160 now. And all of that growth is in Haitians. Um, and this is going to hurt our church. Um, our county government is funded by sales tax, and they're not going out and shopping right now. We normally would have about 50 Haitians in a church service, and we had almost none this past Sunday. So they're just afraid to leave their homes. And there's a very loud anti-immigrant minority. Um, I think the vast majority of people in Springfield really welcome the Haitians and know that they're contributing to our community. Our church made up these little cards that said, "God loves you, and so do we. We're glad you're in Springfield." And we were giving them out right after the cats and dogs comment that made our city blow up. And there's
Yeah.
one Haitian guy who took one and he walked away and he looked at it and he came back and he said, "I just want you to know the vast majority of people in Springfield are really kind to us." And I think that is a good measure of the fact that our community values them. They are helping us to recover. They're helping us to grow. Um, there haven't been any new housing developments in a long time, and there are 3,000 new homes going up in Springfield. Um, and a lot of that is due to the number of Haitians who become part of our community. Again, we're in a county, we're a rural county. Springfield has had like 54,000. Our county has 134,000. So we're a perfect example of rural America and the benefit that Haitians have brought to us.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Jenny, I know you have to step out of the conversation. I want to give you the chance to react to what you've heard and have some last words before you leave.
Yeah, I literally have 1 minute. I want to say that Carl and Mark and others that are bringing, thank you also, Professor Slack and Rachel for your insights, but Carl and Mark are bringing these local perspectives. It's the most important part of this. So I would just say that, what's been really important, and I think people should spotlight, is the fact that 80% of the country but it believes similarly that immigrants add value and that we need to have a fair, firm, and compassionate set of solutions. And so I think that that's really important for us to highlight here. The talking points say to us that America is split on this issue, that they don't find that folks are adding value to their communities, and we know that that's not true. So I really hope that whatever comes out of this conversation, that we make sure to reframe that in the very heavy polling that shows that 80% of the country actually knows that we need deportations or violent criminals, but not to remove contributors and our neighbors who give so much, and that immigration is net valuable. So I just wanted to highlight that on my way out, Pilar. And I'll drop my email in the chat in case anybody wants to follow up.
Okay, because I wanted to know what poll
Thank you
that
for having me.
was. Okay.
Oh
Thanks,
yeah,
Jenny.
it's on our website. It's on our website. Email me
Okay.
or look at forumtogether.org.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Jenny. Okay, let's move on. So Professor Murray, you've heard Mark describe Northwest Iowa, and Carl describes Springfield. Are these places exceptional, or are they manifestation of the broader transformation of rural and small town America?
I'm sorry, Pilar, that's a question for me?
Yes, for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they're probably a bit of both, really. I mean, they're illustrative cases of the unique problems and prospects that of the present moment across all kind of different places, right? So, in some ways, you could sort of think about some of the issues, I think, as canary in the coal mine, right? That could sort of alert us to the problems and ways of doing things maybe better, or the challenges that we're apt to see in more and more places going forward. One of the big things that I think is important to stress to people about the demographic issue is that the white population in the United States of America is in natural decrease. Okay, that's the bottom line. So that meaning there's more deaths than births in that population, thus it is shrinking. And that's especially pronounced in rural America. And that's not the main thing that's a function of is age, right? I mean, you're just talking about a population group that has a higher average age, right? Or age structure. And so what that means is people are aging out of their childbearing years, right? And they're getting closer to the end of their lives, right? And if you want to offset that, the path is bringing people to your community, right? Bringing folks in. Now those can be, domestic migrants, they can be international migrants, but for much of rural America, in the absence of that, you are going to have places that are aging and shrinking. And what that means is declining tax bases, closing schools, labor shortages. And then the last thing I would stress has to do with health. And there's two things that I think are really important here. One is that older folks tend to have unique health needs, right? And for those health needs to be met, you need working age people to meet them. Okay. So that's, I think, a really big deal, especially with the cuts to Medicaid that are looming, which are going to have a disproportionately negative impact on rural America because, rural hospitals in particular are very much leveraged on Medicaid and to a lesser degree Medicare. So that's one piece of it. I mean, you need that working age population to service people and help take care of people. But the other thing is that we have something in rural America called the rural mortality penalty. And that is that life expectancy for rural Americans has actually been going down since about 2010. That's something that's pronounced also among working age Americans. And that's one of the things that offsets that is something that demographers call the healthy migrant effect. And that is to say that folks that immigrate from other places are a select group, right? Not everybody's going to pick up and move to another country, right? The folks that do are selective it's a selective group in a number of ways. And one of those ways is they tend to be in better health than the population that they're of origin that they're leaving, or the population that is receiving them. So I think there's a lot of pieces to this, but I think that the health questions and the aging questions and really thinking about what that means for sustaining communities and taking care of people is important. Thank you.
Okay,
Tim,
we have some. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, another aspect of that is a lot of the immigrants were staffing our retirement homes. So
Yeah.
not only were they having children, they're caring for our elderly. So we are hurting, and those were jobs that we had a hard time filling, and immigrants were anxious to fill them.
Okay, I wanted to go to the chat because we have a lot of questions. So, and we can have the rest of the conversation around these questions. And I'm going to go to the questions that I think can be answered here. Henrietta Burrows, want to ask your question, please?
Thanks so much, Pilar. It seems that what all of you have talked to speaks to MAGA's greatest fears, and that's the replacement theory, that white people would be replaced by the immigrants. And if America was to stay America, it had to push them out. So, with that thinking, what do you think the administration foresaw in terms of the economic consequences, other than telling white Americans to have more babies?
I don't know. Rachel, you want to take a stab at that or?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for bringing great replacement theory into this conversation. And I popped into the chat a primer that Jenny's organization did a few years ago, because this really is such a pervasive part of the narrative on immigration, not only here in the US, but increasingly globally, that is being used to drive extremely dangerous politics. And I think if we understand the way that scapegoating is part of the immigration debate in pitting the interests of US born folks against immigrants on the basis of race or other dimensions. I think we understand a little bit better how to not only operate on the kind of legal playing field in the immigration conversation, but also on the narrative playing field. And I think that's extremely important right now, especially as we're having this conversation about rural places. It is really essential that our leaders, whether our faith leaders, our political leaders, our community leaders, are not just responding to the tropes, the really ugly tropes of great replacement narrative, but working to actively see the narrative, which is both, true and vital if we're going to get out of where we are right now, which is, great replacement really thrives on these ideas of scarcity, that there are people that are competing for scarce resources. And I think the reality of most of our country, including rural places, is actually a story of abundance. And I think, you have all pointed to this well, but I think Carl spoke of this very specifically around one of the issues where we see this playing out a lot, which is around housing and the idea that if immigrants come, there'll be, not enough housing, when in fact immigrants are often the ones building the homes, representing, 1 in 8 of our construction industry, for example. So I don't know if I have the full answer to what you were asking, Henrietta and Pilar, but I just want to
It's
say
hard to
how
answer.
important it is to be actively pushing back and explaining to the American public, not just in facts, but in storytelling, that we will benefit mutually from a nation that is welcoming.
Sunita, my colleague Sunita Swaraji has a question for Pastor Ruby that can also be answered by Mark. But Sunita, you want to ask your question?
Absolutely, for Pastor Ruby and for Mark. How has the local community stepped up for those in Springfield who are afraid to leave their homes? And what lessons can other communities learn from Springfield as to how to approach their immigrant communities?
And to Iowa for Mark.
Yeah, I'll start by saying the faith community has led the way. Been hard to get the business community to engage or even to admit that immigrants are helping their businesses. But we have one group called Springfield Neighbors United, which is a group of about 400 individuals who all want to help support Haitians who live in Springfield. And then we have another organization called G92, which is an organization of about 20 churches who have said we will either provide sanctuary or we will help churches who are providing sanctuary. So on top of those things, we have a rapid response group that has emerged. They were following ICE and monitoring their movements today, trying to give people a heads up when they're in town. There's a group that I don't even know who they are, that just announced a rally tonight in support of our Haitian immigrants down in front of City Hall. So this has brought our community together in a lot of ways. There are people who didn't know one another or who hadn't worked with one another, and this has been a basis of new working relationships. So I really think I hope that when the story is told, the story won't be about the awful things that the president said, but will be that the community of Springfield rallied around people when they were attacked. And I see that happening every day.
Mark, can you tell us about Iowa and the area where you are, Northwest Iowa?
Yeah, I would echo what Reverend Ruby said, that both in Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, advocacy groups are growing and assisting folks, doing everything from delivering groceries to going to with folks on their court dates for court appearances and so on, creating emergency packets that if there is some sort of ICE raid or ICE action, that they know what to do with their documents, with their families, that they do some pre-planning. That has gone on at some level for many years and through multiple administrations, depending on what's going on as the wind's blowing on immigration enforcement. But it's multiplied by 10 or 20 now as folks are stepping up to assist. Again, the churches and the Catholic diocese and many other denominations are providing other types of services. We here in Sioux City have a monthly march for folks to show support, to show advocacy, and keep the spotlight on the issue of immigration. There's some other political issues attached to those marches also. So there is support and there's public support. Unfortunately, I don't think many of the city leaders, law enforcement leaders, and even county elected officials who have traditionally been advocates for immigrants are saying much. Not that they've lost their will to advocate for them, but they're concerned that targets will be painted on their community or their jurisdiction, and it will bring more attention and they'll do more harm than good by public speaking. I can do it. I'm retired. The gentleman who came behind me is a huge advocate. He's cautious. He doesn't want it to hurt his community.
Got it. I want to ask a question of Professor Slack and whoever else wants to answer it. What happens to these towns if substantial numbers of immigrants are not there anymore? Like tomorrow, there's millions of people deported. What happens to these towns? Professor?
I mean, what happens to the towns is they age and shrink and die. I mean, because the existing population what we have in so many rural communities, right, is people that are either aging in place or young people who are being, going through the schools there, but then going elsewhere for education and economic opportunity, right? And when young people leave a community, the community doesn't shrink just because they left, but also they take their reproductive capacity with them when they go somewhere and build a family somewhere else, right? So it's sort of a double whammy for a small community in terms of population. So without people coming into the community, right? I mean, older people, right? You age out of childbearing, right? So it's not as if older populations are going to start producing a bunch of children, right? What communities need is folks to come there from other places, and those might be domestic in migrants. They might be international in migrants, right? But without them, the result is going to be aging and shrinking populations, declining tax bases, labor force shortages, school closures, et cetera, et cetera.
Pretty. Okay.
Yeah.
Peter
And I'll just say,
Sherman
I would just say one more thing, if I could, and that is, you got to put this on top of some of the things that have been going on in rural America already, right? I mean, part of the read on the political situation is that rural and small town America has been hurting for many decades and has been largely ignored by the political class. So whether it's issues with deindustrialization or farm consolidation and those sort of things, right? I mean, poverty is higher in rural America, unemployment, underemployment, all of these sort of things, right? So you got to put the immigration story on top of a situation where there's already existing pain. I think contextualize it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go to the question that Peter has. Peter, your question about the polling, it's relevant here. If 80% of Republicans support administration enforcement efforts, these are the people who believe this pain is caused by immigrants, right? I mean, I don't know. Peter, ask your question, please.
Thank you, Pilar, and thanks to the speaker. It's really fascinating conversation. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how the Republican Party, how President Trump kind of uses rural America as a kind of metaphor for white America, when everything you're describing here is kind of the opposite. And so I'm curious about the place rural America holds in our collective imagination and that misalignment. But I'd also like to ask just a little crystal ball gazing with an eye to the midterms. What kind of impact? I mean, Professor Slack just raised all of the dynamics that has created an immense amount of pain in rural America over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Where do you see what's happening now around immigration enforcement pushing the politics of rural America, say, in the next 5 years?
I can tell you in Iowa, which when I moved here was blue and then evolved to purple, and now it's very red. That pendulum is starting to swing because of all of a sudden conservatives, Republicans, however you want to refer to them, they're seeing their neighbors impacted. They never thought about the total impact of the current administration's philosophy and strategy on immigration enforcement. They always had in the back of their head as a whole, not maybe everybody, we were going to remove the criminals. Well, we're not removing the criminals. The majority of the people being detained and being removed have no criminal record. And so all of a sudden their neighbors, their staff, their co-workers, their children's friends in school are all of a sudden not sitting in the classroom on Monday morning because they've been detained. And so I think people are starting to think, I don't know how fast or how that's going to swing the pendulum, but I think slowly our folks, and I think we need to educate our folks that this really isn't a campaign of deportation. This is a campaign of self-deportation through fear. And it's working based on the numbers that Jenny shared with us early on. And that fear is starting to have an impact on white rural America.
Well, it's important to remember also that President Trump's numbers are in the negative, very low. I think the lowest of the low right now. And even on immigration, he's in the negative. But anyone else wants to add to this?
One thing I'll say, I was just recently on a trip to a part of Kentucky that would be kind of a prime Trump area. And we traveled around for a number of days and didn't see a single Trump sign. And that would not have been true before. And I noticed that here in Springfield, a lot of the people who've kept Trump signs up, even though we're not in an election cycle, have taken them down. So I really do think I think there's a significant group who probably won't vote Democratic, but who will just stay home. So I think there's going to be an enthusiasm gap among voters, I hope. that there'll be those who are concerned about what we see happening with our immigrant neighbors, I think are more motivated to come out and vote this year. And I'm hoping that makes a difference.
Yeah. And you can add to that everything else that is going on with the economy and how things have not improved that much and all of that. Rebecca Bartus had a question about religious voters that I thought was, Rebecca, you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much, Pilar. I'm curious because religious voters are a significant part of Trump's electorate, especially evangelical Christians. So, how can faith leaders who support immigration help rally religious Americans to support a welcoming nation? Thank you.
I would say two things. One is scripture. The Bible says a lot about how we are to welcome immigrants. How we are to welcome immigrants shows up in the Ten Commandments. It shows up in the Sermon on the Mount. And one of the best ways to change minds, particularly in evangelicalism, is to show people scripture because they've not heard sermons on those topics. And I think the most powerful way is to create a context where they actually meet a Haitian person or a Latino person. The physical contact with a real person is the most powerful way to change someone's mind. And I think there are lots of people, someone mentioned evangelicalism. I think there are many people, especially many younger people, who are leaving evangelicalism because it doesn't represent what they do believe. They want to be a part of a faith that actually does what Christ taught us to, and that's, treat people like we would like to be treated and care for people who live on the margins, which isn't just a part of Christianity. Most major faiths have those values as a part of their core.
You want to add something, Mark?
Yeah, I would just echo. I know from the Catholic Church perspective and the guidance and example of both Pope Francis and now Pope Leo, our bishops have become way more vocal and just not in words, but in providing services and support in a very visible way. And I think that's, that has to bleed down to the priest and through the parishes and so on. And although it's probably not where it should be, it's getting better at that because people do exactly what Reverend Ruby said. There's a whole lot of good stuff in the scripture that clearly states Christ's example and his teachings, and they don't have to get political to make a point from the perspective of the church. Preach the scriptures, and it gives you the answer.
Okay.
I saw one question about how this is affecting children and adolescents. And they are terrified. I had one family left the area recently, and they have a teenage daughter, and they have a young boy, and I can't imagine taking a teenage daughter back to Haiti in terms of the sexual violence that has become such a big part of the gang activity. And they're just terrified. The children are having nightmares. Most of them have already been traumatized, and now the fear of being sent back is just overwhelming. I don't know how they live with it. We have one little boy that I talked to recently who was talking about seeing hogs in Haiti eating human bodies. I have a guy from my church who they decapitated his best friend and left his body in the front yard. So the level of atrocity that these people have already witnessed is just unbelievable. And so you think of being afraid of going back to Haiti, think about how much more fearful you would be if you had witnessed these things and knew them uh, not just as theoretical things, but things are a part of reality if they go back.
Okay, there's a
Pilar,
question by, yes.
I wondered if I could just comment real quickly. There was the question earlier on some of the political impacts, and I think there's a couple things that are really important for people to remember. I agree absolutely with the pastor that, what if you see people that are upset in most of rural and small town America, they're not going to move toward the Democrat. They just probably won't vote. Okay. And the issue is that the Democratic Party has largely pulled out of many places in rural America, outside of places where they've had long-term success, like in Black communities in the rural South and Latino areas and rural Southwest, tribal lands, and so forth. The Democratic Party doesn't have much of an organizational force in much of rural and small town America, and you don't have to look any further to the leadership of the current Democratic Party to see part of the problem. I mean, we're represented by Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. Those are not just two guys from big cities, they're two guys from the same big city, and they're two guys from the same borough in the same big city. And those optics matter to people. And I think that there's sometimes a disconnect there. I mean, when you look at the Trump vote is not off the line. I mean, he has gained in rural America, but that's not off the line that was occurring before Trump was around. I mean, the rural America has been going Republican because that's who's there.
Okay, so we only have about 4 minutes left. I'm just going to go around the panel and asking people to give us their, I don't know, some hope. It feels bad right now, but what makes you hopeful? Let's go that way. Rachel, you haven't spoken in a while, so I'll go for it.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say, I mean, first of all, my own family came to this country as refugees after surviving genocide. I mean, the worst of what humans can do to one another. And I think it's important to remember in a moment like this, the places where we are seeing people standing up for one another's humanity and how important and powerful that is, and what an important story to tell that is, because people follow other people as role models. And we have really an abundance of positive role models, even just on this panel, let alone in American communities. And those are often not the stories that are being told in our media. So I want to just thank all of you for the role that you're playing in helping the American public see and understand what we're collectively capable of in a moment such as this. And I really do believe that we have the power to turn things around. And I think especially if we can push our leaders, whether that's mayors or at the federal level, to not, avoid these conversations and see the, longer term risks of staying silent, that we can prevail, and we can save lives, and we can get to a better part of history.
Thank you, Rachel. Professor Slack? Last words?
Yeah, sure. I think Rachel summed it up really well. That was really nice. The thing again
Sure.
the thing that I would just stress is that if rural communities in this country are going to survive, immigration has to be part of that equation. Thank you.
Yep, that pretty much sums it up. Mark?
I think our rural communities that have experienced the beauty of immigration and diversity need to continue to share that story and their experience and lessons learned to other rural communities, and to remind everybody that this country was built on the backs of immigrants, and this country will be sustained on the back of immigrants.
Reverend Ruby?
Part of what gives me hope is I believe that deep down, most Americans don't like what they're seeing and understand the value of immigration. I think that is the majority. And then my faith gives me hope. I think we're in a story that ends well. And particularly, I'm encouraged by the faith of Haitians. They're watching them worship even while they're under attack is just amazing. So their faith is giving me hope.
Amazing. Thank you so much to all of you for your valuable contribution to this briefing. So our reporters have enjoyed listening to you and learning from you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And to everyone that showed up, have a good weekend.